Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus Show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is all set to present Union Budget 2025 on 1st of February. In our part 2 of lead up to the budget, we are talking about expectations from the budget as far as infra sector is concerned. Now, infrastructure expenditure is a key driver in propelling the nation's economy towards ambitious Viksit Bharat 2047 dream. Now in 24-25, the government allocated a total of 11.1 lakh crore rupees for infrastructure alone, with special focus on critical sectors like railways, defence, power and data centres. So how will the budget satiate the needs of this strategic sector, and will the government also come up with targeted measures and incentivize essentially to fully recognize the potential of infra investments? We will be discussing all of that. What about government's commitment to the National Infrastructure Pipeline, the NIP, with particular emphasis on initiatives like Prime Minister Gati Shakti National Master Plan and the Jal Jeevan Mission? Additionally, can we also expect continued growth in funding for urban infrastructure along with affordable housing? What about new initiatives such as a climate-resistant infrastructure and a comprehensive sustainability rating framework? Will the investment and advancement get a push in metro systems along with support for smart cities and transit-oriented development? How will this budget advance India's infrastructure? Let's talk about that. A lot of questions. We're tackling them one after the other. Joining me on the show are Abhinav Joshi, is the head of research, CBRE. Also with us is Gaurav Jain, vice president, Naredco. And with me in the studio is my colleague Kartik Malhotra. Kartik, hi.
Hi, Shweta.
Let's begin with the most basic fundamental question, and that is infrastructure. The total spending and the capex allocation has only gone up significantly year after year. In the budget of 24-25, we saw a marked expenditure of 11 lakh crore rupees, which was also more than what the previous financial year saw. But as far as capital utilization is concerned, that has been sort of a bummer over the period of last year. What's your expectation, given that it's a capital-intensive sector and it's important to therefore also focus on infrastructure in a way that is more innovative today?
Right. So, Shweta, let's take it one by one. See, I think, let's understand that infrastructure development is absolutely essential to any emerging economy, and India is no exception to that. Now, the 11.11 lakh crore rupees, which was allocated for budget 2024 for the year FY 24-25, if you look at it holistically, that's almost a quarter of the total budgetary allocation at about 48,000 crore rupees or so. So, there's a good emphasis, and rightly so, on infrastructure development. But I think one has to understand that India is already in a sort of consumption downturn. We haven't seen consumption, which makes up about 60% of India's GDP, growing at the rate at which you want it to grow. In fact, the Q2 GDP growth numbers have actually seen a decline both in consumption, which has overall brought the print down to about 5.4% or so. So I think it is imperative, if the government wants to focus on GDP growth, then like we saw during COVID times, like we saw in 2020-2021, the heavy lifting for GDP growth will have to be done by government capex, and that government capex will come willy-nilly from a thrust on infrastructure.
Okay.
But there's a challenge to that. The challenge being that if the government decides to give more money in the hands of the tax-paying citizen, and that is a solid demand this time around, message loud and clear from the middle class that we need more money. We are not able to deal with inflation at hand. So if the government wants to give more money in the hands of the common man or woman, then where does the government get the money to actually fund this infrastructure, and hence what happens to your fiscal deficit targets and what happens to your overall borrowing, and would you rather be in that situation or not? Now, talking about utilization, I think, yeah, we saw just about 60% or so capex utilization last year. I think that number needs to grow tremendously. You need to give out more projects, and you need to build more public-private partnership in building those highways and building those ports and building those airports, because at one level that is infrastructure development and government capex going towards GDP growth. At another level, you're also providing for employment, even though that employment may be informal in nature.
But most of this heavy lifting has come in from government and government alone. Public sector investment. There's been very little interest as far as private sector is concerned, and year on year, none of the government's efforts have really rendered any result there.
Right. So, I think we've got to, again, realize that we are living in an era of high interest rates. The cost of capital is high. There isn't too much demand in the system for private companies to put in millions and billions of dollars worth of investment when A, there isn't perhaps enough demand, and B, when your cost of capital is high. So I think multiple problems. It's going to be a tightrope walk for Finance Minister. I think a lot of issues have to be balanced out, and right now the kind of headwinds that you have globally with Trump in office, with with the dollar appreciating and casting an ugly shadow on the rupee, and the rupee in comparison to the dollar depreciating, I think there are a lot of elements that the government will have to toy around with. But I believe infrastructure will continue to be a focus area, and within infrastructure, I think affordable housing is one segment that the government will want to go after.
All right, let's talk about affordable housing then. Let me get you, Abhinav, into this conversation. One of the, key primary drivers and the focus areas for the government has been affordable housing in the past couple of years. But PMAY for urban poor primarily, which saw an earmarked value of 10 lakh crore rupees as allocation in the budget for next 5 years to come. There has been little to no focus as far as middle class is concerned. We've seen premiumization of real estate in the past couple of years. Do you think it's about time for government to now also tweak its policy as far as Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is concerned, and also bring into fold the middle class of India?
I totally agree with that while the government has been focusing on PMAY as a larger flagship scheme to promote affordable housing in the country, the premiumization that we've seen in the sector, especially post-COVID, has rendered some of the price points that the government was using as a benchmark to provide incentives to the targeted beneficiary. Those price points have become totally irrelevant. So the government's been defining affordable housing as with a ticket size of up to 45 lakhs. Now, 45 lakhs, even in the urban periphery of cities like Gurgaon or Mumbai or Bangalore, you will not find enough supply or enough developer participation. Okay. So first, I think is a major concern around the definition of affordable housing and how the government sees affordable housing across the country, because that needs to be very different for premium markets like NCR and Mumbai, and maybe separately for other cities and completely separately for some of the tier 2 and tier 3 cities in the country. As far as the incentives are concerned, yes, there's absolutely nothing for the middle income segment. In fact, even for the LIG and the EWS segment, the credit linked subsidy scheme that was on offer was also in a way scaled back. And, the last stat that we have, then more than 5,000 crores had been allocated under the credit-linked subsidy scheme, which was essentially an interest subvention scheme. So affordable housing, which was such an important focus for this sector, for this government, from 2015 till pre-COVID, suddenly we see that tax incentives, policy reforms, rebates, more investments, and trying to keep the definition of affordable housing more relevant with respect to the changing times and changing price points. Government hasn't really come up with anything significant. Also, in terms of the tax incentives that were offered to first-time home buyers, there was an additional 1.5 lakhs rebate that first-time home buyers of affordable housing segment were getting. That was also waived back in March 2022. The developers who were participating in the creation of affordable housing, they were getting tax rebate, 100% tax rebate for profit and gains. That was also scaled back in March 2022. So there's virtually nothing left for both the suppliers as well as on the demand side. So what we are expecting from the government this time is a redefinition of this affordable housing segment and appreciate the value that private developers or the private investors can create in this segment.
All right. Gaurav, is that something you're expecting as well, for the government to relook, perhaps rejig the definition of affordable housing, and so as to cater to more people than it's currently catering to as far as PMAY is concerned?
Well, I think the challenge to the discussion today is that we are 2 days away from the budget. So is it a wish list we're going to give to the FM, or is something which we really believe is an issue? But I agree with Abhinav, and Abhinav is somebody I've been knowing for a long time. So the question here remains that, let's check the next situation. What is affordable today is, unfortunately, post-COVID, land prices in the entire country has gone up 3 to 4 times across board. It depends on which, village, city, or tier A, B, C town you are in. So once the input costs have gone up, I think the fundamental which the definition needs to be changed for the budget and the affordable housing is it should be linked only to the square footage of the house. It cannot be linked anymore to the price point because price point is a function of so many things, whether you're in Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, or in any of the tier 2 and 3 cities. So I think fundamentally government needs to do away with the mindset of, defining the area as well as the price point. Both of them cannot coexist. It's impossible. B, I will take you back to the fundamental question of the infrastructure. If you see wherever infra has come in, look at Delhi-Mumbai corridor in Delhi, look at, Delhi, Dehradun highway, look at Delhi-Katra highway, price points across those, land which are crossing those areas have skyrocketed. So I think somehow government also needs to control the input, which is the land price. That's the only way affordable housing will ever happen, because if you're looking at India transitioning from today's, Abhinav is best at the numbers, wherever our urban population is to the projected urban population next 20 years, where will they move in if there is no, land available at a price point which is, affordable? So I think the whole game plan is government has to go back to look at their, how they're able to acquire land once again for affordable housing. Gurgaon has become totally zero with respect to affordable housing because what used to be a land price of 4 to 5 crores an acre has become now 30 to 40 crores an acre. And in a time span of maybe 5 years, 7 years kind of a thing. So it's an unprecedented rise. And how will you be able to get an entire Haryana affordable housing has flopped now. Even some of the big developers used to do affordable housing, they don't do anything like that anymore now. They're transitioning from affordable to luxury, premium luxury, whatever you like to call it. So our input costs land, and therefore, today, if a road is coming up in an area, government is very easily in a position to acquire those roads and land around them in a very cheap price. It's not no big deal. But if they let the land be a function of the market forces, I assure you, affordable housing will always be 100 kilometers away from the city, but not where it should be actually.
All right. Interesting suggestion there, but let's move away a little bit from real estate. I think, you mentioned, Karthik, that these are very challenging times. Some of these factors government can control. It can tighten its purse or let it loose. We'll have to actually wait and watch. But I think there are a lot of global factors which have now suddenly come into play since Donald Trump administration kicked in. And one of these factors is how to make exports competitive. And this is a conversation a lot of people have been having. In order to do that, you have to make India a manufacturing hub. Hence the need for more SEZs and more such facilities where you can have a campus coming and setting shop in India and making it easy for them to do business in India. So perhaps there's also time now to relook at some of these technical parks, some of these special economic zones to incentivize them further in order to really spur our, exports.
You're right, but it's easier said than done because the budget can only do this much. I think what the budget can do is it can allocate funds and it can perhaps say that, hey, here are a few lakh crore rupees for urban development, here are a few lakh crore rupees for rural development, and here is something that is for specifically highways or airports and ships, ports, etc. And railways also, right? Because now the railway budget is also part of the union budget. So I think what needs to be done at a broader policy level, Shweta, I believe, is that we've got to have our focus very clear.
Right.
Do we or do we not want to become a manufacturing nation? If you do want to become a manufacturing nation, and I think there are great merits in trying and aspiring to do that, and maybe we are a little late, maybe the China model is obsolete now, but what China did 20 years ago, if we start doing that now, I mean, Guangzhou 20 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe was just barren land. I think we have enough and more barren land in multiple pockets of the country. But if we have that will and if we have that consensus between multiple ministries and government departments that we want to build manufacturing clusters, then I think that is going to solve for a lot of things. Number one, it'll be infrastructure allocation well used. I think it will lead to perhaps creation of airports and railway stations and platforms in those areas. There is going to be a demand for low-cost labor to migrate perhaps from the farmland to these manufacturing clusters. Once that migration happens, they will need affordable housing to live in. So overall, urban development is going to happen in clusters, and there are going to be these clusters of development across the country, and it will not be restricted to, let's say, the Delhi NCR and 100 kilometers around region that Gaurav was mentioning, or Mumbai, Pune, and the regions around that. I think we'll be able to organically develop good pockets within within the country which are going to take care of employment, which are going to take care of exports, which are going to take care of infrastructure, per se. But again, I mean, these are long-term projects. Honestly, something like this was tried. We did try SEZs, but SEZs again get caught in the bureaucratic hurdles of ease of doing business. How do you get clearances? How do you, set up your shop there? How do you build factories? What are the products that you're going to make there? Are there enough, supply chain mechanisms, raw material input, etc. in place? Where is the labor going to come from? So I think it has to be a holistic plan. The budget, to my mind, can only do as much as allocating and throwing a theory, a strategy out there. But it'll require a lot of ministries and a lot of departments and private sector
that's where
coming
the focus should be.
I think the focus should definitely be there, because we have an example in Bengaluru, we have an example in Hyderabad. These are big IT clusters, even Mysuru for that matter. Beyond IT, beyond some pockets of South India and in North India, beyond, let's say, a Gurgaon or a Noida, we haven't really been able to build employment centers. Even Kolkata, for example, is very, very limiting in the number of jobs and the kind of infrastructure development that can happen there. So we'll have to look, I think, primarily at North India, because labor migration from eastern Uttar Pradesh, from Bihar, from Jharkhand is more likely to happen when the house is not too far away from the place of work. And there is easier sort of, there's more reassurance that, okay, I can take a train back and I can reach home.
Absolutely.
But I think there has to be great deal of emphasis on really making these plans and developing maybe 2 pockets, 3 pockets to begin with, but start building these clusters where manufacturing can happen.
Absolutely. Let's move away a little bit from infrastructure, as we broadly know, has the social, physical infrastructure component to it and the social infrastructure component to it. I want to stick to physical for now. Abhinav, one of the promises of the government, the Modi government, when it first came to power, was to develop smart cities. There was the smart city mission, which resulted in exactly what, Gaurav was pointing at, making land prices exorbitant high in many parts of this country, including, my hometown, Dehradun, and Jaipur, which is very close to the national capital. But since then, nothing much has moved as far as Smart City Mission is concerned. We don't know how many cities are finally smart, what exactly is a smart city, and how would you characterize one? Perhaps time to reallocate some of that funding or rejig that scheme?
Absolutely. I think some of the earlier initiatives of this government were, too large in terms of scale for a country like India. We are the most populous in the world. If you look at the density, if you look at our size, it's just immense. So I guess over the course of time, there was realization that, there has to be a joint effort between what the center can do or facilitate and what the state governments eventually have to do at their end in terms of local programs. But more clarity needs to come from the center, and that's why when it comes to infrastructure, it should not be just about highways and railways. The government needs to be very clear as to how some of these smart cities programs have paved out in the last couple of years. What additional incentives is the government willing to provide to conclude, and which are the cities which have benefited, to what extent, and then what is the next level out of this? Okay.
I mean, do you have some of these numbers to share with us today? As far as smart cities is concerned, do you have numbers? How many cities are finally smart cities who have finally been able to incorporate, at least if not all, some of these aspects of being classified as a smart city?
Well, they had come up with a list a couple of years ago where there were about 15 to 20 cities, primarily tier 2 cities, where initiatives around cleanliness, transportation, connectivity, etc. were taken care of. They wanted to identify 100 plus cities. I don't think so that target has been achieved. But, more importantly, what I want to identify is that, there is a clear realization that the government alone may not be able to do all this. When you were talking about infrastructure overall as a sector, and smart cities and affordable housing, and overall housing is a part of it, they need to partner with the private sector. Private sector, as part of these large infrastructure schemes, it's a very small percentage. Still about 70-80% of the push or the investment is coming from the government, because just these projects in smart cities or large infrastructure corridors, etc., that you've been discussing, the gestation periods are really long. And the lending that's required, the kind of incentive that's required, it's not there for the private player. So I think the government, maybe as next step in the smart city program or in some of the larger urban development program, as 2.0 or 3.0, need to come up with incentives for the private players to come in and to help them in that capacity development.
Okay. Gaurav, how do you really incentivize private players? I think this is a conversation we've been having now, at least for the last 3 fiscal years, if not longer, as to how public capex has fueled growth in every aspect of infra development. How do you really make private sector to also start kicking in, to lend that money, to finally open its mouth and to finally start contributing to infra growth in this country?
So, Shweta and Karthik, I think I'll give you some simple data points. KMP and KGP happened, and so did Kharkhoda. Kharkhoda is the next big thing where Maruti has actually did wonders as always did in Gurgaon. Sanand in Gujarat, Dhulera in Gujarat. These are another 2 places which have actually seen serious infrastructure play followed by the industrial play. Now, what really gets done is the following. Our honorable Minister for Road Transport keeps saying that America was built by the roads which he's doing the same thing in India. Please look at objectively. Wherever there is an infra push, and obviously only government can do it, I agree with Abhinav there. But the after effects of that is like a permanent cash flow through taxation, through GST of the industries and the real estate which follows thereafter. So it's a chicken and egg story. But the example of wherever there's a highway in the city or wherever there is a big, let's say, smart city being done freshly, I talk about industrial for the time being, the fall-off effect thereafter are amazing. They're like, it's like a cascade effect for the life to be. So definitely our push and what my request to the government is, we've been saying that all this while is, have a very clear 20-year horizon for the infra push in this country.
Right.
We cannot have a stopgap today budget, next year budget, because as Karthik rightly said, and I've seen Guangzhou, in similar capacity, China has never looked at into their infrastructure development like a next 2-year, 5-year, 10-year plan. They look at next 50-year plan actually, and that's the reason they are where they are today. I think India is at the cusp of redefining its vision in terms of what needs to be looked into for not maybe next 3 years, 5 years, but next 20 years. And if you're able to consistently build our infra, I assure you, private sector is a follow-up of the government infra push. And wherever, if you see today, there is an infra done by the government in any capacity for that matter, private sector reached that location and is doing tremendously well thereafter.
Okay.
All the land prices, all the developments is done by a private sector thereafter, but you cannot expect them to be they're in a greenfield situation where there's nothing existing. So I'll give you another example. Today, when you look at this new airport being built in Greater Noida, Xever Airport, the corridor between now to Xever is literally a barren land, so to speak. Nothing much is happening. Next 10 years, you'll see it will be as, vibrant as any other place in the country is for the time being. Panvel Airport is opening up, with Adani is opening up very soon now. The question is, some of these developments is being done by the government, some of these developments are being done by private sector, but at the end of the day, the whole idea is to keep pushing the infrastructure to a point in time where we have a next 20-year window. And that's the only way we'll become a good developed country, otherwise we'll become we become more slums. Today city we are developing becomes slums in 20 years time by the time we become ready actually.
All right, I think it's going to be a long-standing conversation. Some of these conversations happen over years' time. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for taking time out. We are, of course, talking about a sector that has seen one of the largest allocations as a percentage of GDP. Infrastructure sector at 11 lakh crore rupees, approximately 3.4% of the GDP in the budget 24-25 onward. Will this allocation increase or not? All eyes will be on that. But that's all we have on this segment. Thank you for watching.